Lesson number 6. We will spend these last 2 lessons looking at the church. And what we'll attempt to do is start from as broad of a perspective as we can, and then we will try to zero in to the specifics of our church. If you look around in our society today, whether you encounter your neighbors, co-workers, friends, or family members, you will notice that we live in a culture with many different types of religions. Some claim to be part of Judaism, while others pledge an allegiance to Hinduism, Islam, or even Christianity. Maybe today you're on a quest for spiritual truth, or maybe you have someone dear to you that you want to share your faith with. But every time the topic of religion comes up, you are left a little overwhelmed with all the similarities and differences that exist between the different religions out there. It's hard to make sense of everything, and I don't blame you at all. When I think about the different religions that we encounter, I picture a Venn diagram. Do you remember that in math? A Venn diagram is a bunch of circles that represent data. If we were to imagine that each circle here represented a different religion, you can clearly see that there will be parts that overlap and parts that don't. We can try to create a bunch of lists that state all the different religions out there, along with all their similarities and differences. I mean, you can put, for instance, all the religions that are monotheistic on one side and those that are polytheistic on another. You can even try to make sense of these different types of religions based on where in the world they originated from. Of course, when searching for a paradigm that makes sense to us, there are an infinite amount of possibilities that exist as we talk about the different religions out there. With that said, I want to highlight a paradigm that I have heard before. A paradigm that categorizes the different religions on one side and Christianity by itself. I mean, it makes sense, right? If Christianity or if any other religion is to claim to be the true religion, then it should stand out on its own. Though there will be similarities, if Christianity is to be the true religion, what then separates it from all the others? All religions say that you have to do something in order to get. In Islam, for instance, at the end of your life, you will face a God of judgment. That the good deeds and the bad ones will be weighed on a scale, and if the good outweighs the bad, with the mercy of Allah, you will be allowed into heaven. When talking about Jehovah's Witness, and no, they are not a part of the Christian denomination, you have to knock on doors in order to earn salvation. Or even with Judaism, it becomes about following these rules and regulations in an effort to be in a covenant with God. Each and every religion will tell you that you have to do something in order to get. This is where Christianity is different. It starts off by saying there's nothing you can do to earn salvation. We start by saying that there's this huge gap between you and God. A 60 million days worth of wages that you owe in this lifetime in order to appease a holy and a righteous God. A debt that you can't pay on by your own deeds. Christianity starts by saying you can't do it. And it also says that it must be done for you. In our previous lesson, we talked about how God has, through Jesus Christ, given us a way to embrace salvation based on not what we do, but by what has been done for us. Well, enough about other religions. Let's start to look at Christianity. Within Christianity, there are different branches or denominations. After the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the book of Acts talks about the beginnings of the one church. But you see, over time, as the church started to grow and expand, different denominations started to form. This happened because of various reasons. Reasons that include such factors as geography, language, culture, power struggles, different stances on a variety of different subjects, amongst others, of course. Now, as Christian denominations, we have basic tenets of faith that bring us together. You can ask the minister or teacher for a handout of the essential beliefs that bring us together as Christians. But for now, let's look at a couple of factors that separate our denominations today. The first one I want to look at is called polity, or the way that we govern ourselves, the way that the church is organized, the systems of rules in place. I want to cover 3 different political structures that you will encounter in the church today. The first is called the congregational form of governance. And in this form of governance, you have a direct governance by the local congregation. There's no higher authority. The Holy Spirit speaks to each individual, to each church. They are autonomous. Examples of this type of church that practice congregational governance are the Baptists and the Methodists. The second form of governance that I want to bring to your attention is the Episcopalian form of governance. Now, in this form of governance, you have each congregation who have their own sense of autonomy. But the difference between this one and the previously discussed one is that there is a accountability held within each congregation. Whenever the congregations have something to sort out that they can't sort out on their own, that goes to the next level of governance, which is the bishop. Now, the bishop oversees each geographical area. And these bishops are held accountable to the Pope. Roman Catholics and Anglicans generally follow this type of governance. And finally, we have one called the Presbyterian form of governance. And in the Presbyterian form of governance, you have something called a session. A session is composed of elders and ministers. The elders are traditionally called the ruling elders, and the minister is called the teaching elder. Now, within each congregation, you have a session. You have elders and ministers, and everything that has to do with the congregation is discerned and led through the session. It's a community discernment process, and whenever issues cannot be sorted out within the local congregation, it goes to what is called the presbytery. Now, the presbytery is similar to the bishop in the Episcopalian model. The only difference is that on the higher level, decisions aren't discerned by one particular person or a particular office, but rather by a community composed of the different sessions of the different congregations. And different presbyteries are organized into synods, and synods at the national level are organized into the General Assembly. I hope this makes a little bit of sense. Community is an important part of this type of model. Community discernment. All decisions are made within community. Different denominations exist because of the polity or the type of governance that they use in their churches. And it also exists because of something called theology. Some say theology is this faith-seeking understanding, or simply the study of God. See, the differences in theology, along with a different emphasis on different doctrines between the different denominations out there, will be reflected in the practice of Christianity that you will see. Let me give you an example. When we talk about communion, Different denominations have a different view of what happens during this event. Catholics believe that during the Eucharist, the bread and the wine become in a mysterious way Jesus' actual body and blood. Now, as Protestants, we don't believe that. It is interesting how your theology affects your practice in worship. They will have, instead of bread, wafers. They use wafers because if you use bread, you can potentially drop a few crumbs. And if you believe this to be Jesus' actual body, then you definitely do not want to do that. You will defile Jesus' body. And if you can drop the bread, then for sure you don't want to take a chance on the wine, for it is his blood. It is interesting that in the Catholic Church, the priest drinks on behalf of the congregation. After drinking the wine, the priest will then add water to the chalice and drink from that. He will repeat this, and finally, with the white cloth, he will wipe the cup, indicating that there are no remains. This sounds foreign to us as Protestants because we don't have the same beliefs on certain matters. This difference in theology affects a different practice of church. Now, I know we've covered a lot here, and as we talk about denominations, some of you may be wondering, well, what about those groups of faith that seem to be straddling the gray areas? I understand the differences between different religions. I even understand the concept of denominations. But what about the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons? Are they a denomination too, or another religion? The best way to answer this question is to look at our essential beliefs. And as I mentioned before, you can get a copy of these from your minister or teacher. Only by knowing well the essentials of the Christian faith can you gauge whether or not these groups are either a Christian denomination or a different religion altogether. Let me give you an example before I close off. Though some consider Mormonism to be a Christian denomination because they believe that Jesus is a creature of God rather than being a part of the Holy Trinity, I personally wouldn't consider them to be a part of the Christian denomination. Know your essential beliefs within the Christian faith, and then you will be able to decide what is a denomination and what is a different religion. In our next lesson, we'll continue to zero in on what church is all about.